Hi, welcome to Educator. This is Teacher Jeff. I'm an educator and an engineer by profession. And today we will discuss Chapter 4. And Chapter 4 is all about the essentials of consumer behavior. And in today's lesson, there are three key areas that we're going to be highlighting. First, we have the theory of consumer behavior. Second, we have the law of diminishing marginal utility. And finally, we have the indifference curve. Now, in order for us to get started, let us discuss first our first key area, and that would be the theory of consumer behavior. So, what is meant by consumers' rational behavior then? If we say consumers' rational behavior, here people will make different choices because their circumstances and available information differ. But rational decisions are made in order to achieve the greatest satisfaction or maximum fulfillment of their goals. And therefore, consumers buy to the greatest benefit or satisfaction from the goods and services that their incomes allow them to buy. So if we say utility, it refers to a one satisfying power, meaning the utility of a good or service is the satisfaction one gets from consuming it. And it has three properties. First, we have it is not synonymous to functionality, okay? And second, it is a subjective notion, meaning it is influenced by personal feeling and therefore perhaps unfair. And third, it is difficult to quantify, meaning difficult to measure. So, as a convenient pedagogical device, however, we assume to measure satisfaction by using util as a mythical unit to measure satisfaction. And if we say util, it is an imaginary unit of measurement used in quantifying satisfaction. And on the other hand, if we say marginal, it refers to either the last unit that has been added or the next unit that may be added to the previous. And it is also known as additional or extra. And if we say total utility or TU, the total amount of satisfaction obtained from the consumption of a good or service. And if we say marginal utility or MU, this refers to the additional satisfaction gained by the consumption or use of one more unit of the same good or service. And numerically, this is obtained by dividing the change in TU or total utility by the change in quantity. And if we say average utility, it is obtained by dividing TU by total number of goods consumed, as you can see on the formula. And if we say utility maximizing rule for all pairs of goods, it can be calculated as mu of x over m of y equals p of x over p of y, or mu of x over px equals muy over py. And if we say law of diminishing utility, it states that the more of any good consumed in a given period, then the less satisfaction or utility generated each additional or marginal unit of the same good. The only exception of the law of diminishing utility is addiction, okay? And we also have set completion. And also, it refers to the additional satisfaction of a consumer whenever he consumes one more unit of the same good. So consumption of more successive units of the same good increases total utility, but a decreasing rate because marginal utility diminishes. So marginal utility can become negative or lower than zero when you are over satisfied. And the next key area of our lesson, that would be the law of diminishing marginal utility. So what does this law state then? Now, the law of diminishing marginal utility is actually a principle stating that as the quantity of goods consumed increases, then eventually each additional unit of the good provides less additional utility, that is, marginal utility decreases. So each subsequent unit of a good is valued less than the previous one. Okay, so the law of diminishing marginal utility actually helps to explain the negative slope of the demand curve and the law of demand. So the law of diminishing marginal utility means that the value of a good or the extra utility derived from good declines as more of the good is consumed. So this has a direct bearing on the market demand, the demand price, and the law of demand. If the satisfaction obtained from a good declines, then buyers are actually more willing to pay a lower price, and therefore demand price is inversely related to quantity demanded, which is the law of demand. And while the law of diminishing marginal utility pops up throughout the study of economics, it is most important to study of demand and the law of demand. So it offers preliminary insight into the age-old question: why does the demand curve have a negative slope? Now, the key to this connection is that the demand price that a buyer is willing and able to pay for a good depends on the satisfaction or utility generated from consumption. So here, a buyer is willing to pay a higher demand price if utility is greater, or lower demand price if utility is less. Now, because marginal utility diminishes as the quantity of a good is consumed increases, which is the law of diminishing marginal utility, buyers are willing and able to pay lower prices for larger quantities, which refers to the law of demand. And therefore, the law of demand exists because the less satisfaction is received for larger quantities. Now, this law of diminishing marginal utility is the counterpart of the law of diminishing marginal returns. Now, as the law of diminishing marginal utility offers an explanation for the law of demand and the negative slope of the demand curve, then the law of diminishing marginal returns offers an explanation for the law of supply and the positive slope of the supply curve. Further support of the law of demand is provided by the analysis of utility and consumer demand theory. So the inverse relation between demand price and quantity demanded can be tentatively explained through two related notions of consumer behavior. First, we have the diminishing marginal utility and the decreasing marginal rate of substitution. So what's the difference between the two then? Well, if we say diminishing marginal utility, this notion states that the extra satisfaction obtained from a good declines as larger amounts are being consumed. So if buyers receive less satisfaction, then they are willing to pay a lower price, which generates the law of demand. And the downside of this explanation is the inability to measure the actual utility derived from consuming a good. On the other hand, if we say decreasing marginal rate of substitution, this notion states that the relative satisfaction obtained from a good declines as larger amounts are being consumed. And on the other hand, smaller amounts of other goods are consumed as well. Now, in this case, if buyers receive relatively less satisfaction, then they are willing to pay a relatively lower price. Now, the law of demand is implied by this analysis by using that ceteris paribus assumption that other factors, including other prices, remain unchanged. So the advantage of this explanation is that only a ranking of preferences is needed. So there is no need to actually measure utility. So while the law of demand is a well-documented, extensively tested economic principle, it is not without exception. So that exception is termed a given good. So what is a given good then? It is actually one in which a change in price causes quantity to change in the same direction. So an increase in price causes an increase in quantity, and a decrease in price causes a decrease in quantity. So a given good exists because the good in question is an inferior good, or an increase in income causes a decrease in demand, right? As you can recall in our previous topic. And the income effect overwhelms the substitution effect. So given goods are extremely rare and generally only surface if buyers spend a substantial portion of their income on an inferior good. And finally, the last key area of our lesson, that would be the indifference curve. And if we say indifference curve, it is a curve composed of infinite points, each representing a combination of two given goods, which yield the same level of satisfaction. So a series of non-intersecting indifference curve is called an indifference map. So the word indifference means showing no bias or neutral. So as you can see on the sample figure, this is an example of an indifference schedule located at the upper part and the lower part. This is an example of the indifference curve. Now, as you can notice in our indifference schedule, this is divided into three columns, right? The first column is the combination or good X. So you have good A, B, C, D, and E respectively. And for a second column, you have the biscuits or your good Y. So in this case, you have good 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And in the last column, you have bananas. So you have there 12, 8, 5, 3, and 2 respectively. So what you do here in this tabulation, you need to prepare a graphical presentation. And so you will be able to arrive with an indifference curve. So if you will try to graph the points, so you will arrive with this particular indifference curve. So as you can notice, let's say in your x-axis, that is your biscuits, and your y-axis, that's your banana. So if you will try to plot the points, so you have there 0.112. And also you have 0.2 and 8, okay, for good B. And for good C, you have 0.35. For good D, you have a 0.43. And finally, for good E, you have 0.52. So actually, that is a curve, right? So that's what we call your indifference curve. And as you can notice in this particular figure, the consumer's indifference curve figure, every point on an indifference curve indicates a combination of two products which provide same level of satisfaction. So let's say, for example, the combination of product A provides the same satisfaction. So for biscuit and banana, they provide the same level of satisfaction, and so on and so forth. So as you can notice, this is a different example of an indifference curve. So if you can notice, you have their consumption bundle. You have consumption bundle V, W, X, Y, Z. And the two goods being compared are the quantity of rooms and the quantity of restaurant meals. And if you try to prepare a graphical presentation, so that is how your indifference curve would look like. So what do we mean by marginal rate of substitution, or MRS then? So if I say marginal rate of substitution, it is the slope of an indifference curve. So here, it shows the rate at the margin at which the consumer will substitute one good for the other to remain equally satisfied. And this is calculated as marginal utility of good X over the marginal utility of good Y, or MUX over MUY. And if we say budget constraint, it refers to the limits imposed on household choices by income, wealth, and product prices. And if we say budget line, it shows various affordable combinations of two products which can be bought given the prices of the goods and money income or your budget. So in this case, a budget line or consumption possibility line indicates the various combinations of two products which can be purchased by the consumer with his income, given the prices of the products. So our ability to satisfy our human wants depends actually on our budget or purchasing power. So if we have more money to spend, then we can actually buy more goods and services, right? So this means we obtain higher level of utility. So if we say the equilibrium of the consumer, it is the combination of two goods which provides maximum satisfaction to the consumer. So this is also the point where the budget line is tangent to the indifference curve. So the consumer cannot buy combination above the budget line, although this has more utility. So he can acquire any combination below the budget line, but it has lower utility. So as you can notice in our sample figure, in the first person, you have they're very thirsty. So that means to say you have high marginal benefit. And at the middle person, you have their moderately thirsty. So meaning moderate marginal benefit. And the last person, not thirsty at all. So low marginal benefit. So as you can see in this sample figure, this is an example of marginal utility. Okay, so the neoclassical economists explained market prices according to the utility or satisfaction rendered by the last or marginal unit consumed. So marginal utility then refers to the change in satisfaction resulting from consuming a little more or a little less of a commodity. So in the example presented, the marginal utility of the first glass of Coke or Coca-Cola is greater than that of the third glass, right? Now, as each glass of Coca-Cola is consumed, then the marginal utility or the desire for one more diminishes. All right, I think that's a good place to stop. If you have questions, please let me know on the comment section below. And if you like this video, please don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell button for the latest updates. Thank you.